Welcome back. In this session, we're going to look at unemployment. I'm your professor, Dr. Matthew Bradbury. This is Principles of Macroeconomics. Let's go ahead and get started. In this chapter, we're going to look for the answers to the following questions. How is unemployment measured? What is the natural rate of unemployment? Why are there always some people unemployed? How is unemployment affected by, say, unions or minimum wage laws? What's the theory of efficiency wages, and how does it help to explain certain unemployment? For our labor force statistics, we're going to turn to a government agency, the Bureau of Labor Statistics, BLS. This is in the U.S. Department of Labor. And we're going to develop these statistics based off of a regular survey of 60,000 households. This survey is based on the adult population, so we're not going to call and talk to people who are 16 years or younger. We're going to look for people who are considered to be adults. And for laboring, that's 16 years, not 18 or 21 like it is for other things. The key labor force statistics that we're going to be looking at are three generalized groups. First, the employed. The employed consists of individuals that are paid employees or self-employed or unpaid workers, but in a family business that supports them. Employed individuals also include full or part-time workers. So long as they're paid, they're employed. The second category is the unemployed. The unemployed are people who are not employed, but who have been actively seeking work in the previous 4 weeks. That's a key. The last category we call not in the labor force, and it's everyone who is neither employed nor unemployed. The labor force is the total number of workers, including the employed and the unemployed, but not the total population. Remember, we cut out people under 16. We're going to cut out some other individuals. In fact, we're going to cut out anybody who's not looking for work or a paid employee of some kind. Let's calculate the unemployment rate. What we're looking for here is the percentage of the labor force that's unemployed. You might think that the unemployment rate is the percentage of the population that's unemployed. That's not correct. The unemployment rate is this measure that's trying to help us understand whether or not we're using our effective resources. So we have to think about what are those effective labor resources. If my 10-year-old niece is not working in a factory, do we view that as an inefficiency? No, we don't. She's not in the labor force. If my retired parents are out playing golf all day instead of, greeting at Walmart, is that a macroeconomic problem? No, it's not. They're not in the labor force. If the incarcerated insane or criminals are not out driving cabs, is that a problem for our economy? No, it's not. They're not in the labor force. So our unemployment rate, what we're looking for here, is a measure of efficiency. Are we utilizing our effective labor resources? Our effective labor resources is measured by the labor force, the employed and the unemployed. So the unemployment rate is the percentage of the labor force that is not being utilized. So what we do is we take the number of unemployed, divide it by the labor force, and multiply it by 100 to get a percent. We also have a labor force participation rate. Here, we want to find the percentage of the adult population that is in the labor force, the percentage of the adult population that is an effective labor resource. To find the labor force participation rate, we take the labor force, which is the summation of the employed and unemployed, we divide it by the adult population, and multiply by 100 to give ourselves a percentage. Let's go ahead and calculate these simple metrics. We've got a nice table here, the adult population in the United States by group. It's for April 2011, vintage data. The number of employed, 139.7 million. The number of unemployed, 13.7 million. And the number of individuals who are neither employed nor unemployed, referred to as not in the labor force, 85.7 million. Take a moment and see if you can use these figures to calculate not only the unemployment rate, but also the labor force participation rate. You may want to pause the presentation. Moving forward, well, we want our unemployment rate, and our unemployment rate is the number of unemployed divided by the labor force. Unfortunately, our previous statistics do not give us the labor force, although they do give us the number of unemployed. So prior to calculating the unemployment rate, we need to calculate the labor force. We define the labor force as those individuals who are employed and unemployed. Both of those figures were given to us in the previous table. We had 139.7 million employed and 13.7 million unemployed, providing us with a labor force of 153.4 million. Now we can move ahead and calculate the unemployment rate. Our unemployed was 13.7 million and our labor force 150.4 million multiplied by 100 gives us an 8.9% unemployment rate. If those are the calculations that you did on your own, good job, you're ready for the exam. Let's calculate the labor force participation rate. In the previous slide, we calculated the labor force, 153.4 million. Now, we need to find out what the population is. Well, the labor force plus everybody not included in the labor force gives us that population figure. Our population figure is 239.1 million. Moving down, we can take our 153.4 million labor force, divide it by our population of 239.1 million, and of course multiply by 100 to give ourselves a percentage. The labor force participation rate is 64.2%. Students oftentimes freak out about this kind of thing because it's some simple mathematics, but I think if you look at it once or twice, you'll find it's fairly straightforward to calculate. The labor force statistics are reported for all sorts of different demographics. They're reported nationally, they're reported regionally, by state, by sector. They're also broken down by gender, ethnicity, and race. The Bureau of Labor Statistics and the unemployment statistics is a deep and rich treasure trove of data from which we can conduct economic and sociological research. Let's just look at some of the basic disaggregations of the unemployment rate according to, say, gender and race ethnicity. These data reveal widely different labor market experiences for different groups. Here we have labor force statistics for whites and blacks, and also disaggregated by gender, two gender dimension here, binary gender dimension between male and female. Regardless of either racial group, black or white, males tend to have higher participation rates than females. Regardless of gender, blacks tend to have far higher unemployment rates than whites. This anomaly is of great concern to many economists and policymakers. Here we're looking at unemployment by race within the teen group, 16 to 19 years. As one would expect, teens in general have lower participation rates than do adults. What is striking, though, are the racial disparities. The proportion of white teens in the labor force getting skills and experience that will help them later as an adult is far higher than that of black teen participation rates. The unemployment rate for black teens is far higher than that of white teens. We've left out a lot of different components here. Let's look at Asian and Hispanic unemployment statistics for all ages. Compared to the national average, unemployment is higher for Hispanics and lower for Asians. The participation rates of these groups are similar to the national average. You may be interested in this table. This is labor force statistics by education level. April 2011 is the year. It shouldn't be surprising to you that educational attainment is positively related to labor force participation. For most people, the prospect of better jobs is a key reason for investing in education. By getting a bachelor degree, you reduce your chances of becoming unemployed by more than half compared to people with only a high school diploma. Here's labor force participation rates by sex, 1950 to 2009. The general trends here are fairly obvious. Since 1950, female participation has nearly doubled from 34% to 60%. Male labor force participation has been declining from 86% to 73%. It's worth thinking about what factors do you think might have caused these trends? Sociological, cultural, what sort of attitudes or structural changes have changed, making them possible or driving them? What are some of the effects or consequences of these trends on society, on culture, on economics, on growth, on incomes? Fascinating questions for us to study. The unemployment rate is a metric. It's designed to capture whether or not we're effectively using our labor resources, but like any metric, it can be flawed. Let's look at some of the limitations of the unemployment rate. In each of the following scenarios, think about what happens to the unemployment rate. Does the unemployment rate give an accurate impression of what's happening in the overall labor market? Scenario A. Sue lost her job and begins looking for a new one. How does that impact the unemployment rate? John, a steel worker, has been out of work since his mill closed last year. He becomes discouraged and stops looking for work. He gives up. Scenario C. Sam, the sole earner of his family of 5, just lost his $80,000 a year job as a research scientist. Immediately, he takes a part-time job at McDonald's until he can find another job in his field. Take a moment, perhaps pause the slide, and think about how this influences the unemployment rate. We'll move on now. Scenario A. Sue loses her job and begins looking for a new one. This is going to be a switch. Sue was in the category of employed and she is now in the category of the unemployed. And so the unemployment rate rises. A rising unemployment rate gives the impression that the labor market is worsening, and it is. Scenario B. John's been out of work since last year. He becomes discouraged and stops looking for work. John effectively enters into a new category, a category called discouraged workers. He would like to work, but he's given up actively seeking a job. He is not employed, and he's no longer unemployed. In fact, he is now not in the labor force. In this case, the unemployment rate falls because John is no longer counted as unemployed, nor is he counted as being in the labor force. In this case, this phenomenon leads to a falling unemployment rate, which gives the impression that the labor market is improving, but it is not. Sam loses his $80,000 a year job and takes a part-time job at McDonald's. The unemployment rate is unchanged. He was employed, he's employed again. Things are worse, not only for Sam, but for the economy as a whole, but the unemployment rate fails to show it. It's fairly obvious why things are not so good for Sam. He lost a great job with high earnings and found himself an insecure job with low earnings. But things are also not good for the economy as a whole, since Sam has some very productive skills that can produce a lot for GDP. Yet we are underutilizing his skills in the production of GDP. We're not using Sam up to his potential as economy, and we're losing out because of it. We might say that Sam is employed, but he's really underemployed given his skills and talents. If specialization is one of the features that drives productivity growth, we're not allowing Sam to specialize in what he does best, and the economy will lose efficiency because of it. What does the unemployment rate really measure? The unemployment rate is not a perfect indicator of joblessness, nor is it a perfect indicator of the health of the labor market. It excludes discouraged workers. It doesn't distinguish between full-time and part-time work, people working part-time because full-time jobs are not available. It doesn't account for benefits or job security or any of the above. Some people misreport their working status in the Bureau of Labor Statistics. This is fraud, obviously. Despite these issues, the unemployment rate is still a very useful barometer of the labor market and the economy. And if you're headed to Wall Street or business, you'll notice that everyone kind of holds their breath and pays a lot of attention when the unemployment figures are released. The duration of unemployment. Most spells of unemployment are short. Typically, 1/3 of the unemployed have been unemployed for under 5 weeks. 2/3 have been unemployed under 14 weeks. Only about 20% of the unemployed are in that predicament for over 6 months. Yet, most observed unemployment is long-term. The small group of long-term unemployed persons is fairly little turnover, so it accounts for most of the unemployed observed over time. Knowing these facts helps policymakers design better policies to help the employed. Now we're going to do something very important for the chapter, which is to decompose our unemployment rate. We're going to break it open and see what features, what factors drive it. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to take the unemployment rate and divide it into two categories. One will be cyclical unemployment. The other will be the natural rate of unemployment. Within any unemployment figure, both of these may be present. You know, there's always some unemployment, though the unemployment rate fluctuates from year to year. We never look for zero rates of unemployment. We don't think they're attainable or possible. So there's always some positive amount of unemployment, even if the economy is operating efficiently. This amount of unemployment that exists even when the economy is operating efficiently, we refer to as the natural rate of unemployment. The natural rate of unemployment is the normal rate of unemployment around which actual unemployment rate fluctuates. The natural rate of unemployment differs between countries. For the United States, the natural rate of unemployment rate is around 5.1, 5.2%. If we see a 5.1 or 5.2% unemployment rate, it doesn't make news. No one's worried about it. It's a sign that the economy is operating efficiently. In Europe, the natural rate of unemployment tends to be much higher. For instance, in Spain, a 10 or 11% unemployment rate wouldn't cause anyone to blink an eye. It's normal, it's natural, and it's consistent with the features of their economy. We'll explain what drives the natural unemployment rate and why there are differences between countries in just a moment. Cyclical unemployment is the second component of unemployment. Cyclical unemployment is a lot like what it sounds like. It's associated with business cycles, booms and busts in the economy. Cyclical unemployment is the deviation of unemployment from its natural rate. It's usually associated with ups and downs in the economy, and we'll study these short-run trends later on. Here's a visual aid to help you understand the behavior and differences between the natural rate of unemployment and the cyclical rate of unemployment. Our red line is the unemployment rate. You can see that it oscillates around our blue line, which is the natural rate of unemployment. When the unemployment rate goes above the natural rate of unemployment, it probably means we're in a recession, and so we've lost jobs and unemployment has spiked above what it usually is. When the unemployment rate dips below the natural rate of unemployment, it probably indicates we're in a bit of an economic boom, and we've driven tighter labor markets and hired more people than is typical for our economy. Deviation of the unemployment rate from the natural rate of unemployment is explained entirely by cyclical unemployment. Understanding what we've just been speaking about and looking at this graph, can you tell me during what periods of time was the U.S. experiencing a recession? Looks like the mid-70s, the early 80s, the mid-90s, and also the Great Recession of 2007 and 8 onward. Can you tell when the economy was experiencing booms? Good job. Let's take the natural rate of unemployment and analyze it a little bit. The natural rate of unemployment can be decomposed into two sources. The first is frictional unemployment, and the second is structural unemployment. Frictional unemployment occurs when workers spend time searching for the jobs that best suit their skills and tastes. Frictional unemployment is short-term for most workers, but frictional unemployment is really about the frictions involved with moving workers from a contracting sector of the economy, where unemployment rises, into a sector of the economy that's expanding, where unemployment falls. This transition can be inhibited by many practical frictions in the economy. One of them is job search time. Structural unemployment is something that we can do something about. Well, frictional employment we can do things about also, but structural unemployment is when we have imposed something on the structure of markets that creates unemployment. So it is something about the way we've constructed rules or regulations in the economy that generates chronic unemployment. Let's look at a couple examples. Maybe that'll help clarify. And also will help explain why sometimes natural rates of unemployment differ between countries. Job search. Workers have different tastes and skills. Jobs have different requirements. Job search is the process of matching workers with appropriate jobs. Sectoral shifts are changes in the composition of demand across industries or regions of the country. Such shifts displace some workers who must search for new jobs appropriate for their skills and tastes. The economy is always changing. It's part of its dynamic efficiency, and so frictional unemployment is inevitable in every economy. Public policy can influence frictional unemployment through influencing job search. Government employment agencies exist to provide information about job vacancies and to try to speed up the matching of workers with jobs. Public training programs aim to equip workers displaced from declining industries with skills needed in growing industries. Can you imagine how the internet has also helped to try to improve or shorten job search time? Where will you turn when looking for employment? Perhaps a database, LinkedIn, Monster, so on and so forth. Technology, a long-run trend in the economy, might help influence frictional unemployment. Unemployment insurance. Unemployment insurance is a government program that partially protects workers' incomes when they become unemployed. Unemployment insurance will increase frictional unemployment. Why would this be? Recall one of the 10 principles of economics: people respond to incentives. Unemployment benefits end when a worker takes a job. So workers have less incentive to take the first job that becomes available to them. They have a partial replacement of their lost income, and so the pain of unemployment is not as great. They're able to continue searching and continue searching for a job that most closely approximates their tastes and skills, and this allows them to be unemployed in a frictional sense for longer than would otherwise be the case. Unemployment insurance. Well, there are also some benefits of unemployment insurance, not just downsides like increased frictional unemployment. One of the benefits is that it reduces uncertainty over incomes. A second benefit is that it gives the unemployed more time to search, resulting in a better job match and thus higher productivity. To talk about this a little bit more fully, from the macroeconomic perception, if we lose jobs, then consumption spending will drop rapidly. But if we've replaced some of that lost income with unemployment insurance, we don't need to see the volatility in consumption that would exacerbate downward trends in the economy in times of a recession. Unemployment insurance acts almost as a bit of an automatic stabilizer to try to keep income and consumption at a more stable level when there is volatility in cyclical unemployment. Secondly, even though unemployment insurance might raise frictional unemployment, thereby creating less GDP than we would otherwise expect over the long run, it might improve productivity in other ways, particularly allowing the economy to avoid underemployment. If workers are able to find jobs that allow them to release their specialization and productivity, then we reduce underemployment and the efficiency losses that are associated with it. Let's turn to structural unemployment. A nice way of thinking about structural unemployment is that structural unemployment occurs any time that the prevailing wage is above the market equilibrium wage. Say that one more time. Structural unemployment occurs when there is a prevailing wage that is higher than the market equilibrium wage. Let's start with one of three examples of this. The first one would be minimum wages. Let's go ahead and look at this diagram. What we see here is a market. In fact, this is the labor market. On the x-axis, you see L, which stands for the amount of labor hours. On the y-axis, you see W, which stands for the nominal wage. The interaction of supply and demand would be the interaction of market forces. Demand for workers would come from firms. It's a downward sloping curve, reflecting the idea that as workers become more expensive, firms reduce the amount of labor that they're willing to hire. The upward sloping curve indicated by S is the supply curve. It's the supply of labor curve. That is households deciding how much labor they'd like to offer to the market. It's upward sloping because as the wage increases, the opportunity cost of not working also rises. As the opportunity cost of leisure increases, people substitute towards work. Higher wages mean higher incentive to work, and people respond to incentives by seeking to work more hours. Where X marks the spot, we would have the market equilibrium wage. Where supply is equal to demand, we would have the market equilibrium wage and labor. If we look at where X marks the spot and look at the dotted line that moves over to the W axis, we see WE, which is the equilibrium wage. At the equilibrium wage, the amount of labor hours supplied by households is equal to the amount of labor hours demanded by firms, and so there is no unemployment. Everyone looking for a job at the current wage has one. Now think that there is a wage above the equilibrium wage, for whatever reason, and that wage is W1. As the wage increases above the equilibrium wage, it becomes more expensive to hire workers, and so firms cut back on their hiring. As the wage increases above the minimum wage, the reward for working is increased, and so Households wish to supply more labor. This leads to a situation where the supply of labor is in excess of the demand for labor. People looking for work exceeds the number of jobs that are available, and this generates unemployment. Anytime we see a prevailing wage above the equilibrium wage, we will see this unemployment, and that is structural unemployment. Let's look at 3 reasons why we might see a prevailing wage above the equilibrium wage. The first, minimum wage laws. The minimum wage may exceed the equilibrium wage. That's the point of putting it in there. This is true not for all job categories, but for the least skilled or least experienced workers. For the least skilled or least experienced workers, minimum wages will generate structural unemployment in that job category. The size of this unemployment has been debated frequently. Many studies have been conducted, and some estimate the unemployment resulting from minimum wages to be quite high. Others estimate it to be low and sometimes even negative. Overall, it appears to be a somewhat ambiguous relationship between minimum wages and unemployment, but let's move on. This group is a small part of the labor force, the skilled, least skilled, and the inexperienced workers. So minimum wages can't explain most unemployment. Do keep that in mind. The second source of potential structural unemployment, labor unions. A union. What is a union? It's an association of workers that gathers together to create a monopoly on the supply of labor. In doing so, it gives workers bargaining power with employers over wages, benefits, and working conditions. Unions exert this concentrated market power to negotiate higher wages for workers. The typical union worker earns 20% higher wages and gets more benefits than a non-union worker for the same type of work. When unions raise the wage above the equilibrium wage, quantity of labor demanded falls and unemployment rises. This leads to unemployment. We can think about that unemployment in 2 categories. One, the outsiders. These are workers who lost their jobs and are worse off because firms have reduced hiring given a climate of higher wages. And the insiders, workers who remain employed, keep their jobs, and receive the higher wages and benefits negotiated by the union. Some outsiders go to non-unionized labor markets, which increase labor supply and reduce wages in those markets. Are unions good or bad? Well, economists disagree about this. The critics say that unions are cartels, non-competitive organizations designed to create a monopoly on the supply of labor. They increase wages above the equilibrium, which causes unemployment and depresses wages in non-union labor markets. Advocates of unions, however, counter that unions use their market power to counter the market power of large firms. Essentially, they're saying there's already concentration in market power from the firm side, and that would lead to exploitation of workers, and so that workers need to unionize to create an equivalent level of concentration and bargaining power in order to protect their own interests. This bargaining power makes firms more responsive to worker concerns. If you ever get a chance in your economics career to take a history of labor markets or a history of unions, I highly recommend it. One of the things that you'll see is that workers and worker rights in this country have only been acquired through a brutal battle, almost a civil war in this country, and that we shouldn't take for granted the benefits that are available to us today. Our first example of structural unemployment came when the government forced firms to pay more than the equilibrium wage. Our second form of structural unemployment came when workers got together and forced firms to pay higher than an equilibrium wage. Our third source of structural unemployment is called efficiency wages. With efficiency wages, it is the firm itself that desires to pay a higher than equilibrium wage. The theory of efficiency wages is the idea that firms voluntarily pay above equilibrium wages to boost worker productivity, thereby raising firm profitability. Different versions of the efficiency wage theory suggest different reasons why firms might pay higher wages. Here's a couple of them. First off, worker health. In less developed countries, poor nutrition is a common problem. Paying higher wages allows workers to eat better, making them healthier and more productive. Secondly, worker turnover. Hiring and training new workers is costly. Workers that stay on the job develop skills and experience that generally increase their productivity over time. Starting over again is a loss of productivity for the firm. Paying higher wages gives workers more incentive to stay and thus reduces turnover costs for the firm. Worker quality. Offering higher wages attracts better job applicants. It increases the quality of the firm's workforce. Worker effort. Workers can work hard or they can slack. Shirkers are fired if they get caught. Is being fired a good deterrent? Depends on the enforcement credibility. It depends on how hard it is to find another job. If market wages are above equilibrium wages, there aren't enough jobs to go around, so workers have more incentive to work and not shirk. Let's see if we can think about some of the firms that pay efficiency wages. One good example is Google. Their treatment of workers is exceptional. The quality of life and the quality of work at the office is phenomenal. Another example would be Goldman Sachs. Their pay is higher than anyone else on Wall Street, and they attract some of the top talent. It helps them to be one of the most profitable investment banks on the street. Let's look at a summary of the natural rate of unemployment. The natural rate of unemployment consists of two components. One of them, frictional unemployment. Job search time is a good example of this. And structural unemployment. Every time the wage is above the equilibrium wage. In later chapters, we're going to learn more about business cycles in the economy, and we can associate cyclical unemployment with those business cycles. These are typically short-term fluctuations in unemployment. In a summary of our chapter, the unemployment rate is the percentage of those who like to work but do not have jobs. Unemployment and labor force participation vary widely across demographic groups. The natural rate of unemployment is the normal rate of unemployment around which the actual rate fluctuates. Cyclical unemployment is the deviation of unemployment from its natural rate, and it's connected with short-term economic fluctuations. The natural rate includes frictional unemployment and structural unemployment. Frictional unemployment occurs when workers take time to search for the right jobs. Structural unemployment occurs when above equilibrium wages result in a surplus of labor. These three reasons for above equilibrium wages include the minimum wage, unions, and efficiency wages. That concludes our chapter on the basics of unemployment. I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your day. See you again next lecture.